Bells will be ringing, the sad, sad news. Oh, what a Christmas to have the blues. My baby's gone, I have no friends to wish me greeting once again. Choirs will be singing Silent Night, Christmas carol by candlelight. Please come home for Christmas. Please come home for Christmas. If not for Christmas, by New Year's night. Friends and relations send salutations. Sure as the stars shine above.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Great Lakes Divide podcast with Bluebelly Tom Crawford. I'm Ryan Schuling. Looking forward to a great holiday season and hope you are as well with the help of the Record Lounge, our proud sponsors, offering holiday sales greetings galore. They will deck the halls with boughs of holly and large vinyl records for your collectibles out there. And for those that you know are into this sort of thing, new music every Friday, and they've got all-time greats as well. Turntables, hi-fi, stereo equipment, anything you could need to bolster your listening experience. They will have it for you at the Record Lounge in Rio Town. That's south on Washington from 496 downtown Lansing on the east side of the street in the Rio Town Marketplace, the Record Lounge in Rio Town. Joining us now from the Detroit Free Press, writer Shawn Windsor, who I've known for several years, used to come on my old show, The Schuling Report in Lansing, and I think wrote maybe the most important piece we'll see this entire sports season from the fall going into the spring, the storyline surrounding Cassius Winston. And the article is entitled, Michigan State star Cassius Winston's grief is so heavy, not even basketball can ease it. You can find it at freep.com online. Shawn, thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ryan. It's good to be with you.
Now, this is a story I felt was important to be told. I'm glad you're the one that told it, but it couldn't be easy to tell, and what you had to do going through the timeline of recreating exactly what happened and when, and who found out about the news of Zach's tragic passing and when, and how that information was relayed to Cassius Winston, and how the team is dealing with it even still to this day. Take us through your process in crafting this article and what went into it.
Well, to be honest with you, it started the night of the Duke game, which I was at in East Lansing. I had not seen the team play live since the opener at Madison Square Garden against Kentucky. And so I watched them on TV and kind of watched the body language of Cassius and the team and so forth. But the night of the Duke game was different. And at first I thought maybe it just was the difference between being in person and being on television. But I leaned over to a colleague at one point, and I told him I felt like a voyeur, Ryan. Like I was almost at this, what was Cassius's body language was so unsettling to me. It looked like he should have been somewhere privately grieving. Instead, he was wearing a pair of shorts in front of 14,000 people or 15,000 people or whatever. And it just felt a little uncomfortable in a way. And a colleague next to me has been with the team this whole time, said, well, this is kind of what he's been going through. But I just thought I saw something different. So after the game, later that night, I asked Tom Izzo if we could talk a little bit about not just Cassius necessarily, but what was going on with the team, how much of the issues were basketball on the court, how much of it was Cassius and what he's going through and the death of the suicide of his brother. And so he said, sure. So a few days later, Ryan, I get up there, I'm in Tom's office. He just wants to talk off the record because he feels like anything he says will sound like an excuse, and it'll either put too much pressure on Cassius, it'll be at the expense of him, or it'll make it sound like he's looking for ways to explain the few losses they had, especially the way they played against Duke in that loss. But at the end of the conversation, we talked for half an hour. He's got to go out on a recruiting trip. He says, look, give me a couple of days. I'll figure out a way to talk to you on the record. I got to figure out what to say and how I want to say this. And maybe Cassius is ready to talk. So that's how it really started, Ryan. A few days later, I go back up. Cassius agrees to talk. I wasn't thinking about that at all, to be honest with you. And it's just me and him in Tom's office, and he just kind of opens his heart up, and that's where it started.
Shawn, it's Tom. First of all, I want to commend you on the article. I mean, I had to read it a couple times because there was so much really riveting content in there. But speaking of that Duke game, the thing that struck me when Cassius is looking over and not seeing his mom for that first time, and the impact, and I understand totally why she wasn't there when she explained it, that burnout of people coming up to her and that sensory overload, and it just wears you down. I mean, that to me was almost that told the whole story of how much impact that had on him. And did you kind of see that kind of a lostful look, on the floor when you were watching him in that Duke game, Shawn?
I did, Tom, and I couldn't figure out exactly what it was, but it just looked a little different than the grief you could see he had been playing with already, right? And it turns out he found out his mom wasn't going to be there during the national anthem, or right before the national anthem, and his dad told him. And so it's not just that he's counting on her presence. It's not just the pain of that. It's that then he's worried about her because she just lost her son. And it's one thing to lose a brother, but it's another thing to lose a son. And Cassius is very aware of that. And the role he has in his family is not like the role he has in that team, right? He's the center of it in a way, even though, I mean, it's not that he's the mom, but so he's worried about, is she okay? He doesn't care about playing Duke in that moment. I mean, that's why Izzo said, and Cassius kind of admitted a little bit, but Izzo said, look, I could see him looking over there when he was dribbling. Normally in good times he looks between stoppages and play, a timeout, whatever, and he'll just kind of, because he's very close with his family, but he just wasn't there, and you could see that, and it's very understandable why.
Shawn Windsor joining us from the Detroit Free Press, and this is an issue, of course, that goes back to just before the game against Binghamton, and Shawn outlines that in his article, the decision by Cassius Winston as they went into the overnight hours the night before, the team staying at the Kellogg Center as they do right before home games, gathering and discussing this and whether or not he was going to play in that very first game. And you think about the fact that this grief of losing his brother comes in waves, and he's dealt with it every single game since, including the Duke game that Shawn talked about, that's kind of sparked the idea for this article, and all the way through this past Wednesday night's game, the 77-72 win at Northwestern. But let's go back to that Binghamton game as you pieced everything together, Shawn, of what happened in that timeline and the chaotic nature of what must have been going through Cassius's mind, scrambling, coping with this fact and this initial stage of grief. My brother's gone. How do you come to terms with that? How do you acknowledge that happened? His family shows up. I mean, just take it from there, if you will, and what led to Cassius actually playing in that game against Binghamton.
Well, I think the instinct is certainly for athletes, and maybe for a lot more of us, in a moment of grief, maybe even in a moment of shock, which is surely what he was in, right? They were all in shock, just the way that happened. That there's a certain amount of adrenaline. And if you think about it, so they found out, I don't know, midnight, right around midnight, maybe a little before midnight the night before. It was a Saturday, and they were at the Kellogg Center, the hotel where the team stays on the weekends for home games. So they're up till – so Izzo and Mike Garland, assistant coach, are in the lobby with the parents and Cassius' girlfriend, I think, and the younger brother, Kai, who also played at Albion College, who'd driven up with the assistant coach. So they're all there sitting on the floor, not in chairs, by the way, not in furniture, but on the floor, which is a very powerful thing if you think about it. You want to be – at that moment, you kind of want to be next to the earth, right? You don't even want to be propped up by a chair. That's how what kind of out-of-body experience you're having in that moment. In any case, Izzo leaves at 4:30, but I don't think Cassius goes to bed. So if you think about that, he hadn't slept. And he kind of thought maybe a brief escape would be to try to play. And when you have that much adrenaline going through you anyway, that's kind of how he got through it. Izzo had encouraged him not to play, told him if it were him, he wouldn't play, or at least he didn't think he would play. But he didn't want to make that decision for him, so he left it up to him. And I think Cassius being Cassius, he felt like he maybe not owed it to his team. They surely would have understood, but maybe for his own peace of mind, thought that was the place he needed to be. He found out fairly quickly that's not where he wanted to be, but at least that night against Binghamton, that's where he wanted to be, and that's why he was there.
Shawn, I mean, I think I've realized more this year than ever how much of an integral part or the core piece Cassius Winston is on this Michigan State basketball team, the 10 deep or whatever it goes on. It seems to me they kind of look at him, maybe this has been part of the struggle with this team, Shawn, is it they look at Cassius and read off him. What's he going to do? And should I make a move because this is his team? I think the fact that Cassius was hurting that bad affected the play of the rest of the team, don't you?
Oh, no question, absolutely. And the coaches will tell you that because they're not quite sure how to. They're not quite sure. They were, at least for the first couple of weeks, they weren't quite sure how to coach the rest of the team, let alone Cassius, right?
Yeah.
And the rest of the team didn't know how to act to him, around him. And every time he walked in, and I wrote about this, every time he walked into a film room or a practice or the dining room table or wherever, it would get quiet. Whatever chatter the locker room, right? Whatever chatter he heard, it would kind of go away, and he knew why. And as tight as they are, and he has some really good relationships on the team, but they're all close. They're still 19, 20. At our age, it's not easy to know what to say in that situation. Right. And so they didn't know what to say, and that affected everything. And you're right, people looked to him, but the whole team hadn't been quite the same. Now they're getting a little bit better. You can see that. There are also some basketball issues they have to work through that are separate from this, including Aaron Henry, who's got his own pressure of, trying to get to the NBA that he's dealing with, which is why, and that's what he's struggling with. But no, Tom, to your point, it all starts with Cassius.
Shawn Windsor, Detroit Free Press, the article. If you have not read it, I implore you to do so. Michigan State star Cassius Winston's grief is so heavy, not even basketball can ease it. You can find it at freep.com. Shawn, kind enough to share some moments with us about writing this article, the aftermath of the article, and the takeaways that you had. Because, Shawn, as a writer, I mean, you have an idea, a concept, like you said, you're sitting there at the Duke game. This is a story that needs to be told, and I think I want to tell it. You go to Tom Izzo. He formulates how he wants to tell this story without compromising maybe some confidences in Cassius and not making excuses in Tom's mind. I can totally hear Tom Izzo saying that about their struggles this season when they have come up. But in walking away from that conversation with Cassius, the one thing that stood out to me in the quotes that you pulled, and I'm so glad that you chose to do it the way that you did, Shawn, and that is let the quotes tell the story. There's nothing else really that can pull that narrative forward as much as Cassius did. And it kind of goes back to your point about Cassius's mom, the sensory overload of people with good intentions coming up and saying, hey, we're thinking about you, we're praying for you, if there's anything we can do, and it was just too much for her. It seems like Cassius kind of experienced that same thing, that people come up, they want to comfort him, they think they know what he's going through, but they don't know what he's going through, and he made that point to you. What were your thoughts about that?
Well, he did, and I think he's absolutely right, and let me share this with you real quickly. So that day in the office with Cassius, I interviewed, if you want to call it an interview with Tom, but I talked with Izzo first, and we talked for a while. And then he left. He went outside in the hallway because I think Cassius had come over at that point, right? So he said, let me go get him, and we're going to talk for a couple of minutes, and then I'll send him in. So I'm in Izzo's office by myself for 3 or 4 minutes. And for the first time in a long time in my career, Ryan, I have a pit in my stomach. I was anxious. I was anxious. And Cassius is somebody I've talked to on and off for 3 years. He's a great quote. And, I shouldn't say he's a great quote. He's just a really thoughtful human being. Mm-hmm. And he's really smart. And he sees everything. And in any case, and I have a relationship with him. So I'm feeling this. And what I'm asking myself, this is what I was asking myself. I know everybody says to him, I'm sorry for your loss. That's probably the first thing they say to him, or something along those lines. And I'm thinking, do I want to say that? Do I want to be part of that? Is that how I want to? Is that the first thing I want to say to him when he walks through that door in a minute or two? And I decided I didn't. I didn't want to do that. I just said, hi, Cassius, and we talked, and we just kind of started talking. And then he started talking and telling me what the quote you're referring to and that part of it. And when he was done saying that, I told him about my own struggle before he walked into the office. And I said, look, obviously, didn't say obviously, but of course I'm sorry for your loss. And we talked it through, and then that led to some more interesting conversation. But I was sort of relaying the little struggle I had. I know, like we talked about his team, his coaches. Izzo said he can't sleep. He goes to bed every night trying to figure out how to talk to Cassius and coach him and navigate this with him, you know? I mean, and I experienced that for 30 seconds on my little level of, you know, outside the program. I can't imagine what that's been like. So that's kind of what, Cassius was really, really smart in talking about it that way. And I eventually figured out, last thing around, I needed to get the heck out of the way. You know, normally I want to write my own words, and because I feel like I can describe or say what I want to say, it's a little more precise. And I don't normally have that many long quotes. I like quotes. Obviously, you need people's voices. But he was so powerful and raw. It took me a while. You know, I spent a few days working on it. It took me a while to figure out, just get the heck out of the way and let him speak. And that's why the way it ended up.
You know, Shawn, your transparency, I think, it kind of opened up his heart to you. I think that was really a good way to go on that. You know, I want to talk about the Northwestern game with Cassius. Ben, I think Izzo talked about this post-game about it was kind of Cassius back to being Cassius. And, you know, 37 points, he had 37 minutes, he had 21 points, he had 6 assists. I mean, there's still a couple turnovers there. But did you see him? And I know it, as Ryan said, it's going to go in waves. There's no question about that. But did you see him getting a little bit back to more normal Cassius in that win over Northwestern?
Yeah, and he shot the ball a little bit better because his legs were a little bit better. In fact, when he went 1 for 9 or whatever it was against Oakland several days ago, when was that? Maybe over the weekend. And that post-game press conference, you could hear Izzo, when he was talking about the 1 for 9, you could hear him start to say something. And he stopped himself. And what he was going to talk about was he's not sleeping and he doesn't eat and he hadn't been lifting. There's a reason for this. But again, he didn't. You go back and watch it. He bites his lip. And he should, because he didn't want to put that pressure and he didn't want to sound like he's making excuses. But I thought against Northwestern, you know, because he's sleeping the touch better and he's starting to eat a little bit more and he's getting up extra shots a little bit. I mean, it's slow, but I thought you could see that at Northwestern for sure.
Shawn Windsor joining us, Detroit Free Press, a 77-72 win for the Spartans over Northwestern on the road. Probably tougher than it should have been, but we're hearing the reasons why, and that this is a process of recovery for Cassius, and he's still on that road to get back to who he was and where he was, and he won't ever be totally the same person he was before he lost his brother, Zach. One telling exchange, though, and this was on television as I was watching the game, Shawn, and you might have seen it either during or after, is the banter, the exchange between Tom Izzo and Cassius himself after one of the plays. They got a little heated, they got into it, and then Tom kind of nodded, gave that kind of knowing look, and like, okay, well, you made a pretty good point, and put his arm around Cassius, and that dynamic of leadership between Tom Izzo on the sideline, Cassius Winston being Tom Izzo on the floor, it's different. I'd like you to explore that a little bit more from your own perspective and vantage point, because we see the kind of similar personalities that Tom Izzo, Mateen Cleaves were, that even Tom Izzo, Draymond Green were. Cassius is not wired that way. He's different. They have a very close relationship. Cassius is much more calm. How would you describe that relationship between Tom Izzo and Cassius Winston?
Well, I think in some cases Cassius is a teacher, and Izzo will tell you that, and he relishes that, and he let's put it this way. So on a basketball team at this level, the assistant coaches usually divide up the day-to-day responsibilities. They're going to work with the point guards, the bigs, or whatever, right? And they kind of player by player, groupings of players. Winston's the first player that directly reports to, I don't want to say reports, but works with Izzo since Mateen. So it's the first time he's had a player, right? So that tells you one thing. And another thing is that Winston knows how to settle Izzo.
Yeah.
Right? And he just does. He just does. He knows how to quiet his mind a little bit. He's like an Izzo whisperer. and Izzo knows how to, right. Izzo knows that Winston wanted to be pushed. And Mike Garland has helped a lot with that too, right? Just get a little bit more serious, because Cassius plays with so much joy, and that's just how he lived his life. And you remember as a freshman, so Garland has really helped a lot with that too. But Izzo wants to push him, and that's what's been tough about this is he hasn't felt like he could. But he knows at some point he's going to need it. He's been trying to figure that out, and I think you're starting to see that. And I think that is what you were witnessing the other night, is the relationship settling not back, because it's going to be a little bit different, because Cassius isn't going to be quite the same. Nobody is after that kind of a loss. I mean, parts of you are the same, but you change how you see the world a little bit. So, but they're going to get into, I hate to say new normal, but that's kind of what we were seeing the other night a little bit. The comfort level, especially from Izzo, and pushing and prodding and poking his star player, and Winston being engaged enough to turn around and meet it with just as much force in his own way.
And we started to see that a little bit more, as Tom pointed out and as Shawn just alluded to, in that game against Northwestern with a couple of tune-ups, Eastern-Western, for Illinois and Michigan to start the new year and to get right back into the Big Ten schedule. Those will be two tough games, and we'll see, charting from here, where Cassius Winston and this team goes. It's uncharted territory, maybe for any team in the country, to deal with what they're dealing with. And again, a phenomenal article written by Shawn Windsor, Detroit Free Press. Michigan State star Cassius Winston's grief is so heavy, not even basketball can ease it. We'll hope that with the addition of basketball back into his life, his family, his teammates, those that really care about him, that Cassius, of course, can recover, because he's a remarkable young man, as Shawn has painted such a great picture both in this article and in our conversation today. He's going places, whether that's on the court or off, and both definitely going to be the case for him. Shawn Windsor, Detroit Free Press, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Take care, Tom.
Thanks, Shawn.
Shawn Windsor, Detroit Free Press, and we remind you that the Great Lakes Divide podcast is brought to you by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. All your holiday shopping needs, and even afterwards, you want to get some specials heading into the new year? Well, you want to hang around and visit the Record Lounge in Rio Town. It's south from 496 downtown Lansing. Easy access there on the east side of the street from Washington. The Rio Town Marketplace. Take a journey back through time and take a look ahead to the music that comes out new each and every Friday as well. Hi-fi stereo equipment. It is the greatest collection of music and music equipment you'll find in the state of Michigan. If they don't have it for some reason, they'll special order it for you. 24 to 48 hour turnaround on that. Just work with Heather Frary and her staff. They are there to serve you. The Record Lounge in Rio Town. Bringing back in Tom Crawford now, and before we get into Michigan State Northwestern, the game that took place this past Wednesday night from our recording time here, Tom, just your thoughts on what Shawn Windsor had to say, reflecting on the article. And I know you and I have both spent a lot of time individually thinking about Cassius Winston, what he's been going through and dealing with. You've done some Tom's takes on the subject as well. And what I like about what you bring to the table, Tom, not only in this podcast, but on all your platforms and social media, is that human touch and perspective of what sports means. I think that's where you and I connect, in that we're diehard fans. We want our teams to win, but we know that there's a real life out there, and this is just sports. And while we take it seriously and we get into the nitty-gritty and the X's and O's, and we suffer with losses and we're joyous with wins, it's not what defines us as people. And I think we're seeing that play out in real time, in real life, with Cassius Winston.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's sports. Everything in life is relative. We know about that. And there's, in the real world, and in this nation right now, heading into 2020, we're gonna be coming on the threshold of one big contentious year. And I think everybody's got to have a clear mind and perspective about other people and what people are going through. And I think with Cassius and the loss of his brother, obviously the taking your own life aspect of that brings guilt to the survivors, those close people in the family, and people don't understand that. And as I reiterated this last time, I think the sensory overload that Cassius goes through, the mother goes through, because when you run into people that you don't even know, and everybody is really kind about it, and that just the numbers just get out of control of people you have to dialogue with, and that wears you down, because you have to mask your pain underneath, and you have to and you have that forced smile, and even though you're just so hurting inside, I can't imagine that the Winston family has been able to do what they've been doing in terms of being at these games. So that Duke game really hit with me, and Shawn is such a talented writer, and I really appreciated when he was on here talking about the fact that he struggled with the interview. He had a pit in his stomach of how to approach the interview. I mean, that was really good stuff.
Absolutely, and you touch on a key point there with Cassius Winston, and that is, if you're Cassius Smith on the streets of Detroit and this happens, your family deals with it, those close to you, maybe family, friends, but in this instance, he's Cassius Winston. He's a national basketball celebrity on the college level. Everybody knows him, and the people that come up to him, again, well-intentioned, they know Cassius, or they feel like they know Cassius, but Cassius doesn't know them, and in truth, they don't know him, not really, not deep down, not personally. And that was the quote again that was most powerful for me coming out of Shawn Windsor's article, Tom, was Cassius revealing that fact of, it wasn't him trying to be nasty or negative about it, but that these people coming up wishing him well, he acknowledges that, but they don't know him. They don't know what he's going through. They can't relate to it. And as much as they try to demonstrate empathy, it's a human instinct for those of us that are wired that way. It's not something they could possibly put themselves in Cassius's shoes and know what he's going through. Only he can know that. And that makes it seem like all the sadder, Tom, that he's on this island unto himself, that nobody really can really connect with them. Maybe not even Tom Izzo, in a way that makes Cassius feel okay about what's going on.
No, and I think part of what Cassius is, he's kind of a victim of this incredibly positive persona he has. I mean, since his freshman year, he's had this incredible, a reputation of being so accessible and so nice, and everybody can't resist. They can't resist going up to him because he's developed this relationship with the fan base, and fans are, people are just want to reach out to him and they want to hug him, and that kind of leads into this perfect storm of the sensory overload. So, but I think what I saw on Wednesday night in that Northwestern game, as we segue into that, just optically, as I'm watching that game, he looked more back to normal. I mean, at least on the surface. I know he's hurting inside, and that was good to see.
Absolutely. We'll get into the details of that 77-72 win in Evanston. It was the first road win by any Big Ten team this season in its 14th game. Every other team won at home, lost on the road. Every other team but these two are 1-1 in conference. Michigan State alone atop the Big Ten through 2 games at 2-0, and Northwestern is the only 0-2 team, falling to 5-5 overall. Michigan State 8-3 after this victory. Robbie Hummel, Big Ten Network, had Tom Izzo after the game with these comments.
Coach, I have to say it. Congratulations. You've broken the road curse here in the Big Ten Conference.
Yeah, I guess we did. I tell you, we didn't. I thought we played really well at times and really poor at times. There was almost no happy in between. I was a little disappointed with some guys, but Cassius came through and Xavier played a little better second half, but the turnovers I thought were of ridiculous nature. I'm sure you did too, but keeps me in business. I guess I got to keep working.
You said today at shoot-around you felt like the team was going to play well. You guys did get off to a good start. What did you think about the way that you guys approached tonight?
Well, I thought in a lot of ways we did a good job, and they hit some shots. When we had that one substitution, they were up, I think we were up 15 or something, and Bowie hit about 2 or 3 threes. Give him credit. Personally, I love Chris's team. I told you that today. I think they're young, but he's got a lot of good players. His place is beautiful. Northwestern's going to be back.
So it was kind of a back-and-forth affair. It looked like at times Michigan State might pull away. They probably should have. They were up by as many as 15-16 at one point. Then Tom Izzo kind of alluded to it. Foster Loyer comes in. It's nice to see Loyer get those free throws under his belt. He's one of the best. He is the best free throw shooter, I think, in MHSAA history from Clarkston, but just can't be trusted in these minutes. It was a 10-point turnaround from the time that he came into the game that Winston came out and Northwestern went on this tear. And more importantly, there was always one guy, it seems, in a lot of these games for Michigan State that goes off against the Spartans, and it was Boo Buie in Northwestern's case, off the bench, 26 points. He was 8 of 13 from the floor, pouring in threes like they were going out of style, 5 of 7 in that regard. This is just a freshman from Hiram, Georgia. What a get for Chris Collins and Northwestern. And let's focus on the Wildcats just for a moment, because other than Buie, you got another guy, Pete Nance, with 14 points, 7 rebounds. Tom Izzo said, don't sleep on these Wildcats. Tom Crawford, you and I assumed that Northwestern was going to be down this year, and they still might be. Was Izzo just giving a little bit too much credit to Northwestern, or is there something there that you can see maybe brewing beneath the surface?
No, because Tom Izzo, I think, prefaced it, it's more of a futuristic thing. And when you talk to Northwestern personnel, media people about Northwestern, they go, yeah, there is a ton of freshmen and sophomores. When you look at the roster, you see strange names. You see not recognizable names in the past. So this is kind of like this turning point, going on to the next set of players with Northwestern and Chris Collins. I think they are going to be really good in a couple years. And they did beat Boston College. They're just not very good right now. I mean, Northwestern and Rutgers are probably the two worst teams in the Big Ten, but Northwestern, beat Seton Hall, who just beat Maryland. I mean, it's kind of a crazy to detect who's the worst team right now, but I think it is Northwestern, but it does have potential. And with that, the revised arena and all that stuff going on, I think Chris Collins is still the answer for Northwestern, but this was a game that Michigan State I thought should win by 15-20, not by 5.
Right.
And one other thing about Foster Loyer, and I'm Mr. Positive about Foster Loyer, and I've watched him play in high school. I just think when he's good against teams like Northwestern, and I thought he had some productive minutes, but boy, when you get him against the high-end caliber competition, he really falls short. And I don't even know. He's a great match for certain teams, but not so good match for really, really tough competition. That's my thoughts. What are yours?
Yeah, it's got to change, too. I mean, who do you have other than him to come in and run the point? I mean, Josh Langford, it was just announced with foot surgery. He is out for the year. He is not coming back. He is reconsidering his stance, though, about leaving no matter what, that he may indeed come back for one more redshirt season. And what a tremendous boost that would be for Michigan State coming back in 2020 and 21 with him and Joey Hauser coming back into the fold. The transfer, of course, from Marquette, but they do lose Cassius Winston, so it's a little bit of an even trade there, perhaps, but not a lot going. If you have Cassius out of the game, he had to play 37 minutes in this one. Foster Loyer just 3. That balance needs to be a lot closer to 30-10, and I don't know how Loyer gets there or if he's able to get there for the reasons, Tom, that you just kind of spelled out there. He seems to be nervous, frazzled, a little wired tight, maybe ahead of himself, turning the ball over, and that was a story here for Michigan State in this game, just careless and casual with the basketball. They had 16 turnovers to just 8 for Northwestern. Foster Loyer had a really bad one that was a turnover for touchdown, as Tom Izzo likes to put it. And let's start again. I don't want to pick on him necessarily, but there is something going on. And we talked about this earlier a little bit, touched on it with Shawn Windsor, Detroit Free Press. Aaron Henry, 1 of 9 from the floor, 1 of 5 from 3. Looks like the weight of the world's on his shoulders. He's thinking way too much out there. He holsters up for a wide open 3. He thinks about it too long. Then he penetrates. He's indecisive. He had 8 rebounds. He had 5 assists. So it's not that he's playing selfishly out there. I don't think he's playing selfishly enough. I don't think he's playing with enough confidence, aggressiveness, assertiveness. He had 6 turnovers in this game, and a lot of those were careless passes that were low percentage. As you're watching Aaron Henry right here, Tom, I think Shawn nailed it. This is a guy that's thinking about an NBA future, but you got to conquer Paris before you can get to Rome, so to speak. You know what I mean? You got to get the goal that's right in front of you, dominate at the college level before you even worry about the NBA. Is this a guy, a young man that's just got too much in his head going on?
Well, yeah, because we talked about these off-season expectations. Who's the number 2 guy to go to from a scoring standpoint? You have Cassius. Who's that second guy? Xavier Tillman's going to obviously deliver a full repertoire of arsenal and for rebounding and points and obviously a lot of minutes, but it was that second scorer on the front line, and Aaron Henry was a guy. So a lot of offseason talk about Aaron Henry of anticipation, and obviously I don't know the pressure that went through that, but I still go back to that post press conference in the Duke game when Tom Izzo says, and he said this in a really compelling tone, like, I have no idea what's going on with Aaron Henry. He was, Tom Izzo was being Tom Izzo. He was being transparent. So I don't know, his confidence is gone. Sometimes it takes that one big-time breakout game, and if he has that against an Illinois or a Michigan, that perhaps could get him out of the schneid. We're talking about that week number 1, January 2nd and January 5th, 2 critical home games. Michigan State plays their first 3 Big Ten games at home. He's got to deliver big time. He's at home. He should be able to do that. And so I'm looking for that. I expect that to happen. Michigan State needs Aaron Henry to get back to being the Aaron Henry that we had, Michigan State fans had last year. And so I'm expecting that. Truly, I'm expecting that when Big Ten play reconvenes in early January in those 2 big games with Illinois and Michigan. And we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, the 1-9. Hey, bottom line though, like you pointed out, if you rebound and you dish, as in the 8-5, and he had in that rebounds and assists, that's a positive thing though.
It is. Again, this is a guy that's trying to do the right thing, but maybe trying a little too hard. He's just got to let it all hang out and be who he is, and come what may. And one guy that has been doing that, and I thought was remarkable in this win over Northwestern, was Gabe Brown. And we talked about the three guys that needed to kind of elevate their game. Henry being one, Marcus Bingham Jr. being another, and he did have 6 points, 5 rebounds. But Gabe Brown shined in this game. He was looking for his shot, hit 3 of 4 from 3, attacked the basket as well, had 11 points, had 10 rebounds. He's becoming an integral guy, and maybe that number 3 guy behind Winston and Tillman, establishing himself. Doesn't surprise me at all. I think he's got the energy. I love his motor. I love Gabe Brown on the floor. I think he is that kind of great complement to Cassius as a starter. Don't look for him to come out of the starting lineup. Kyle Arns has made it known he wants to come in off the bench. Some guys prefer that. That's a good role for him. They need Kyle Arns to be more productive offensively, shooting the 3, attacking the basket. Thomas Kithier, love this young man. I've said it many, many times. This is a guy, when he's on the floor, good things happen. 6 points, 4 rebounds, good defender, smart player. There was a freeze frame that I tweeted out. You might have seen it, Tom, where he pulled up for about a 10-foot jumper, Xavier Tillman sealing out inside the paint, and he could have driven the baseline and dunked. Those are kind of feel things for the game that will come to him in time. But I'm looking at Kithier going, this is a guy, maybe you don't start him, maybe you stick with Bingham and Tillman up front, and then you have Winston. You got to have Gabe Brown, and I think Aaron Henry's got to come around, and he's got to be a starter. But Kithier's one of these guys that you don't lose with him on the floor, and the things that he does only contribute to winning. He's a winning player, and I think I want to see more than 15 minutes out of him in most games.
Yeah, and Kithier, I was really surprised. Funny you bring up that 15 minutes. That stuck out in my mind because now the mask is off. He's gotten through that, and Izzo remarked that's going to bring more confidence what he does with the ball offensively in terms of execution. With Kithier, you need 22 to 25 out of him because he's going to bring rebounds and he's going to get that garbage underneath and the putbacks. Back to Gabe Brown though for a second. He truly is that third guy, and part of it, we talked about the energy and all that stuff, and he's really become productive. He hits twin digits pretty much every time out right now. But he's got this moxie, fun personality. I think he keeps the other team members loose.
Yes.
And there's a certain ingredient to that I think teams need, particularly if Aaron Henry has kind of had some absenteeism, and also because of Cassius Winston, of what he's going through. Maybe Gabe can make up some of the leadership of fulfillment that Cassius is struggling with because of what he's going through emotionally. And maybe Gabe can be even that, the fire and brimstone kind of guy, can do it all. Because Cassius doesn't have that edge to him, as we've talked about many a times. And all these great Michigan State teams have had guys that got a little edge to them. And I'm talking, obviously about Mateem and Draymond Green.
You couldn't have said it better, Tom. I could not agree more that Gabe Brown's got that personality. It uplifts everybody around him. It's a great fit for this current roster. You got kind of the stoic Cassius Winston and the workman-like Xavier Tillman, all these guys that are willing to do their role and play their part. But Gabe brings that flash, that panache, that flair, if you will, the dancing, all those things that you're right. It's important that you have a guy like that. You might not want a team full of guys like that, but Gabe Brown is just a genuinely good soul. I've talked to him many times. He's very personable. You could tell right now, too, Tom, that when Cassius leaves, this might very well be Gabe Brown's team. He's got that kind of character.
No question in my mind. And Draymond had that kind of, he's got a little Draymond Green in him in that regard, because Draymond could be tough and but he could be, he could have that, that funny aspect of him too, personality wise. So as he's done with the Golden State Warriors. So I think you're right. You nailed that right moving forward next year.
Yeah, a couple of games here around the holidays for the Spartans with their in-state smaller school rivals, giving them a chance to get some gate and exposure. Eastern Michigan will be the opponent this Saturday. That's a 7 p.m. start, Big Ten Network. They'll be off for the Christmas holiday, Michigan State, for 8 days after that before heading back to Breslin to face Western Michigan. That'll be a later start, 9 o'clock Eastern on Big Ten Network before Illinois comes to town after the new year. That's a Thursday, January 2 game and the final tune-up for Michigan State. It'll be a tough test before Michigan comes to town. Looking at the Wolverines, they'll have Presbyterian at high noon this Saturday, same day that Michigan State plays Eastern Michigan. That'll be on Big Ten Network as well. And Tom and I will recap both of those games in our Sunday podcast. It'll be our last recorded in real time podcast for calendar year 2019, as I'll be heading to Tampa for a week-long vacation over the holidays. We'll have some best ofs for you, including the interview you just heard with Shawn Windsor, our interview a little back with Ed Sherman, author of This Is Big, the Big Ten book, and kind of those great collection of takes that Tom and I have had over this last month or so, and we appreciate you listening to the Great Lakes Divide podcast. Final thought on basketball before we wrap it up. We haven't talked about Michigan here, Tom, and just catching up your thoughts after the loss to Oregon, these two games that should really be kind of appetizer plates. Presbyterian on Saturday the 21st, UMass Lowell on Sunday the 29th, and then it's to East Lansing for the Wolverines to face off against Michigan State. What are you looking for over these next two games for Michigan to fine-tune? Maybe answers on players that you're looking for.
Well, this is experimentation time. I mean, Presbyterian, college. I mean, come on, this is school in South Carolina. Who are they going to play next? Central Methodist? I mean, this is crazy. I mean, this is a very small school, and then Lowell, Mass would be great if it was a hockey game. So, yeah, and I'll be at both games, and but I'll be looking at different combinations. I think this is a great opportunity for Juwan to approach it like his team played productively against Houston Baptist, which was playing really, really good against a very bad team. And Presbyterian, I think Clemson, which is a so-so team, beat them by 30. So, experimentation with some of the player personnel that they're going to, including DeJulius and Xavier, because I think David DeJulius is one of those guys who could really, really have a Derek Walton-esque breakout year, the way Derek Walton did. I'm thinking his junior year. So, looking for that, and then obviously their next big test is that game January 5th in East Lansing. I know it's a long ways away, but man, from a Big Ten standpoint, it's the next one up, and that could be I really haven't picked how that game's going to go. I think seeing Michigan State go against a lesser competition now coming up, I'll get a better gauge on how that game will go.
So once again, Saturday, high noon, Big Ten Network, Michigan and Presbyterian from Chrysler Center. And then later on that night, 7 o'clock start, also Big Ten Network. Eastern Michigan makes the trek north and west to East Lansing, again, this Saturday against Michigan State. We'll recap both games in our Sunday podcast. Before we take off, I do want to touch on National Signing Day for football. Mark D'Antonio had these thoughts broadcast on Big Ten Network about the class that he just signed.
Very, very solid. A lot of guys have played in their state championship games and excelled across their state and their environments that they've played in. So we've got some guys that, second, back up to the alternate to Mr. Ohio. Angelo Gross, second in Mr. Ohio. A couple guys that were the defensive players of the year in the state of Ohio in their divisions, Jeff Petrowski and Devin Hightower. Darius Snow comes from Dallas, Texas. Eric Snow's son, who played basketball here, is tremendous talent. And top to bottom, I think we did a great job in terms of what we were asking our coaches to do, and our players to do as they came into this recruiting process.
So we start with Darius Snow. That is the son of Eric Snow, part of Fire and Ice. You remember those guys? Sean Respert, Eric Snow, early 90s, absolutely. Michigan State basketball. Oh, yeah. Let's not forget, too, Percy is his uncle. Percy Snow, former linebacker for the Rose Bowl championship team of 1987, will go on to an NFL career that started with the Kansas City Chiefs. So a good athletic legacy get there in Darius Snow. Mark D'Antonio mentioned by name as well Angelo Gross, a cornerback who was runner-up for Mr. Football State of Ohio. Devin Hightower, a linebacker, was mentioned, and Jeff Petrowski, a defensive end. So no surprise, as Darius Snow is a defensive back himself, that Mark D'Antonio kind of focused on the defensive side of the ball. But my concerns are on offense and whether Michigan State is going to be able to restock and develop this offensive line, what they're going to do at quarterback. They did add one QB in this class, Noah Kim from Virginia. They had 6 athletes from the state of Ohio in this class, 3 from the state of Michigan, including Dallas Fincher, offensive lineman from East Kentwood High School, Tommy Guarado from Dearborn, as well as Ian Stewart, a wide receiver from Woodhaven, Michigan. But that's the test to me, Tom. We could look at signing classes all day, and we can go back. The cautionary tale for Michigan State is that 2016 class that looked phenomenal on paper and dissolved before their very eyes for various reasons. We don't know a whole lot on these guys until they get into the program and maybe are even there for a couple of years. But those are the questions that I need answered for Michigan State, not just from this class, but from what's coming up in the program right now. And there's a rumor out there, Hondo Carpenter has reported, take that for what it's worth, that there might not be any changes on Michigan State staff. I find that very difficult to believe, but whether the athletes at the skill positions will come forward, if they're going to explore the transfer portal for maybe a quarterback, we talk about the guy from Stanford maybe, a running back, they're certainly going to need depth at that position, and even at wide receiver. As you look at Michigan State right now, Tom, the forecast for next season and beyond, where does it turn for you?
Yeah, Ryan, I'm not smart enough to figure out these guys, what the caliber of these recruits. I mean, when I look at, the huddle videos and things like that, yeah, you're seeing the best ofs and all that stuff. And I'm sure the staff, is going after what they need. But bottom line on Michigan State, the Big Ten is really ramping up some of their teams in terms of recruiting prowess. You're getting Purdue and Iowa in the top 30s right now. Wisconsin is going from the 40s down into the 20s. I'm talking about nationally. But then Michigan State is in that 40 to 50 range. And the fact Michigan State has the 11th or 12th best recruiting class in the Big Ten, that would cause concern, at least on paper, if we're going to use that term on paper for Michigan State, when you consider that element along with the fact that no coaching staff changes are likely perhaps. I think that's going to get fans not so excited about 2020 for Michigan State football.
So the Michigan State recruiting class, you can check it online. Significant numbers because of the defections through the transfer portal and other attrition for MSU. And we'll see how many, if any, of these freshmen are able to make an immediate impact for MSU. Lord knows they could use some impact players at several positions, most notably on offense. And we'll see if Mark D'Antonio, that might have been just coach speak to players trying to communicate stability about not changing the staff. But there's got to be changes, particularly to that offensive staff. I would be shocked and dismayed if that was not the case. Turning to Michigan's recruiting class, 4 from the state of Michigan, including Braden McGregor, defensive lineman from Port Huron. Also Makari Page, a defensive back from West Bloomfield, Michigan, and West Bloomfield High School. His high school teammate, Cornell Wheeler, a linebacker from West Bloomfield. And Andre Selden, a defensive back from Belleville High School. One from my area out here in Colorado, that's Reese Atterbury, offensive lineman, big guy, 6'5", 284 from Eagle Crest High School. Very good football high school, I can tell you that, here in Aurora, Colorado. But one of the things that stood out to me, and I found this to be very interesting, Tom, I just want to get your thoughts on geography here. No players in Michigan's signing class from the state of Ohio. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't, because Ohio State owns Ohio, and there's in Penn State delves into Ohio. The thing about the University of Michigan, and I'll tell you this both from a student body standpoint and from as far as recruiting football players and basketball players for that matter, is that their footprint is the United States and beyond, basketball beyond, worldwide. I mean, it's becoming, half of the enrollment at the University of Michigan right now is out of state. And when we're talking about football players, 4 from the state of Michigan, I mean, their footprint is the United States. And right now they're going after as many high caliber athletes as they can, but you know what they're kind of hovering, and I call it the bridesmaid level. When you're in the top 300 right now, top 300 play, they have 9 out of the top 300 players in the nation, and that's kind of cool. That gets you into the 9 to 11 range as far as nationally ranked. Some people will be happy with that, but if Michigan wants to get into that, the Big 4, Big 5, when you're talking about Alabama, who had 20 kids, mind you, 20 top 300 kids, and you have Ohio State, LSU, Clemson, all in the 16, 17 range. and Auburn as well. I mean, it's like they're a notch below talent-wise, and I think that's why you're going to see Michigan for the foreseeable future being in that 9-10 range, because they're not going to get up to the Ohio State caliber of talent, which, you know, they're a top 3 recruiting class in the nation, and Michigan fans are going to kind of just sit there and be frustrated that they're going to be pretty good, and then they're going to play in a Citrus Bowl game and that kind of game. But man, for them to be at Ohio State, that looks discouraging moving forward.
And that moves me back to my original point, Tom, that I want to make with you about the state of Ohio. And I'm just going to say this. Desmond Howard, Charles Woodson, 2 Heisman Trophy winners. Where are they from? The state of Ohio. They've had many players come north from the state of Ohio to make an impact at the University of Michigan. Why punt on Ohio altogether? Why cede that ground? Why surrender Ohio, this talent-rich state for football, to Penn State and Ohio State? Why not at least try to make inroads and get a foothold in Ohio rather than not signing a single player from that state?
Well, because those kids in Ohio were brought up to be. I mean, Michigan lost a quarterback that, you know, came to, and he was at the basketball game the other day, and he signs with Ohio State because when push comes to shove, all of a sudden, to be able to wear the scarlet and gray comes into play. If I'm Jim Harbaugh, I would have taken the same strategy. Secondly, the state of Ohio high school football is not top tier on a national level as it quite was relative to some other states. And I'm talking about the state of Georgia, obviously the state of Florida. I would just pound that nail in the state of Florida, just like everybody else is. And they're going to the West Coast. They're going all over the place. Brand yourself, we are a national school. I would stick with that and not get caught up. I mean, they have the resources to do that. I mean, and they have the energy to do that. And so I don't necessarily care for the Michigan goes down and delves into the old days, because it's not the old days. And Penn State is a part of that too, because Michigan and Penn State are those 2 Big Ten teams that are fighting over every year a distant second in recruiting. It's Ohio State, big gap, Penn State, Michigan, and then maybe a little gap, and then you get the Wisconsins, Purdue's, and Iowa's moving after that.
Well, so National Signing Day is now in our rearview mirror. We see what happens with Michigan State and Michigan. And again, these are seeds to be planted for fruition down the road. There's very little you can read into these recruiting classes or even the rankings. They're fun to talk about, but at the end of the day, so to speak, a phrase that I hate, but in this particular instance, it applies. It's only as good as you're able to develop these players. In the past, Michigan State's taken 0 stars, 1s and 2s, and turned them into stars. That has not been the case of late. They are lagging behind in recruiting. Their coaching staff is old, retread, needs to be, I think, revamped in large part, and it remains to be seen whether Mark D'Antonio is going to bite the bullet and do that. All indications are obviously that he'll be back, but with what changes? And what changes if you make no changes? Nothing changes. And for this offense, that is just not acceptable. We'll have a full bowl preview coming up for both Michigan State against Wake Forest in the New Era Pinstripe Bowl. That's coming up. That'll be the following Friday from our current recording time on the 27th of December, televised on ESPN. That's a 3:20 Eastern time start from the Bronx and Yankee Stadium. And then again, the Citrus Bowl, Michigan, Alabama. We'll preview that one. Will Tom Crawford be bold enough to pick the Wolverines? We'll give him a couple days to think about it. That's a 1 o'clock start on New Year's Day. ABC with the coverage, Eastern time zone there. Number 14, Michigan against number 13, Alabama. Tom Crawford, final thought.
Well, I just think we're, for football, important bowl games for both Michigan and Michigan State. Recruiting is one thing. You got to end on a high note, and so I think these are really critical opportunities. And Michigan's got the much more daunting challenge, but Michigan State has got to. They got to go out and beat Wake Forest. I mean, that they can't afford a loss, because that could really hurt the momentum going into 2020.
So that'll do it for us from here for now. Again, sponsored by the Record Lounge in Rio Town. For Tom Crawford, I'm Ryan Schuling. The sounds that you hear come to us each and every time out from Heather Ferrari, her great staff. Check them out today. Still time to get your last-minute holiday shopping in. They've got great store specials. They'll even give you a special consideration for mentioning this podcast, The Great Lakes Divide. Just give them a wink and a nod, and we'll see what Heather can do for you. Again, all the latest and greatest in vinyl and all the the all-time greats as well, and they have the equipment to play the vinyl records. If you're like, where do I get a stylus? Where do I get a phonograph, record player, a sound system, a high-fidelity stereo from back in the day? They've got that all for you there as well. All the collectibles you could possibly want, and what they don't have for you, they'll special order it 24, 48 hours, the turnaround time there. The Record Lounge in Rio Town. Have a great weekend, everybody.
He's gone 2,000 miles. It's very far. The snow is falling down. It gets colder day by day. I miss you. The children will sing. He'll be back at Christmas time. In these frozen and silent nights, sometimes in a dream, you appear outside under the purple sky, diamonds in the snow.